Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
We ended with this notion that God is going to, in verse 8 of chapter 6, that God is going to turn over to the enemy complete cities. All right? And that is now, that's a kind of a connector into verse 9, which starts to give you, which gives you an inside view of what these cities were like after they were conquered by the enemy. Again, not named, but this is generally, this is what one could expect to find when a king, the armies of a powerful king take over cities, and we're going to now read this, okay? So this is, scholars think this may be a very interesting evidence, and something that's not made up, because it's very detailed. It's not outrageously mythological, very earthly. And it could be indeed giving us a sort of a cultural picture of the time of the middle of the 8th century BCE. And I remind you that Amos, based upon content and use of his view of the reality at that time, appears to be the oldest prophet who has complete book in his name. Okay, so let's look now, chapter 6, verse 9. V'haya im yevater asara anashim b'bayit echad v'metu. If 10 men were left in a house, in one house, they will die. Okay.
Does this relate at all to the Abraham arguing with God about if there were 10 righteous men? This is the opposite of that.
Oh, yeah, well, the number 10, yes, it could be, right. We don't know exactly why that is. They needed a minion. What you're saying is, before they get killed, they have to have a minion of men, right? So if it's 9 men and 1 woman, they wouldn't have been killed.
Then you see.
That's tongue-in-cheek.
They keep a lot of women around.
Those of you who are using this, looking at this in video form, ignore what I just said. Anyway, it probably has some significance. It means a substantial number, okay? But it means that so when people were killed, if they were found hiding in houses, okay? And why would that happen? We don't know, but it's very possible that, given that there are 2 possibilities. They didn't want any hangers around because, number one, they could be part of people, if these people were there, and it was a substantial town, and there are a lot of people hiding in these homes in small numbers. After the army leaves, what could they do? Theoretically, they could regroup and become some kind of a resistance from within. That's number one. Number 2, if you are the Assyrians, and I've no doubt that their methods, people living in Yisrael at the time, especially people who, had contacts with people in the government, either because they argued with them, because they hated them, or whatever. Like today, they had a sense of what was going on around. And it was probably known that the Assyrians, which were the closest empire at the time of Amos, that their policy was to clear out cities, right? To take the citizens, scatter them in their empire so that they would not get together, and to bring other people who were more pro-Assyrian, whether they were Assyrians themselves or people from other countries willing to do this or forced into doing this, but they would fill up the towns with people who were not local and had no organized national feeling that would result in a revolt. So that makes sense that they want to clean them out. All right? However, there's something else to be involved here, and this is the notion of people getting killed and dying and staying in the house, and that leads us now to verse 10, which has a whole other piece in it, okay? And here, I must say, the commentators I looked at, the language here is very spotty, and it's not fully clear what they're really talking about. I don't know, let's look at the Hebrew. Okay, v'nas'o dodo u'mesapro lahotzi atzamim min habayit. Okay, so someone's kinsman carried him. All right, and there was also a man who was going to Misarfo, who was going to burn the house along with him. All right. So they carried the dead man that was found. Someone was going to carry them out to take the bones out of the house, presumably for some form of burial. Okay? But then you got this other guy who apparently is the person responsible for burning the house with him. All right, okay. This is the best guess that some of the translations have. If you have others, you can we'll open up the floor and we can discuss it. But
I would like to say something, but you finish, please, Rabbi.
Yeah, let me just finish, okay, Vera?
Yeah. I just said, please finish.
Oh, okay, thank you. Anyway, so the burning of the house is an interesting question. And we're going to see at the end of the verse, let me read on. Okay, Vera, go ahead before I read on.
Well, commentary about the word mesarfo. So there are two explanations that I know of. One explanation is the word mesarfo, the samech changes to a sin, and that comes from the word lisrof, to burn.
Yes.
So Nesao carried him, his uncle, and then mesarfo can be also a noun, and that means the brother of the mother. So there is an uncle in this scene.
That's Dodo.
There is an uncle, Dodo, but there is the word mesarfo, the one that is another uncle in that scene, that is the uncle of the mother. Dodo is the uncle of the father. So there are like two characters in this pasuk, if you want to understand it this way, to take out bones, like we say.
Oh.
And he said to the person, there's one hiding.
No, I'll get to that. Yeah, we haven't read that yet. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
let's do it.
Yeah, but but let me just respond to that's a definite possibility. Of course the notion of to assume that this is what was your first suggestion?
The verb lisrof, to burn.
Yeah, right. That has been, I saw that raised in discussed by one of the commentaries, and their point was there's no evidence at that time of an Israelite tradition of cremation. that was not seen in terms of the Israelites. Okay. Now, and the assumption is that the person who's carrying here, these people are people from the town, right? These are not the foreigners. They haven't come in yet. So these are people from the town who were basically required to deal with the dead. All right, that's nothing unusual, as we know, right? That lahavdil, the crematoria in the death camps that the Nazis ran. Who were the people who loaded them up and who took care of all that? Jews, right? So the notion of using people internally to deal with these matters is something that was going on. But you're right. I'm not gonna be in any way dogmatic here. It is quite obscure. But then it goes on. The Amar la Asher b'Yarkatei Habayit, and so that presumably the Dode is now calling out to the other guy who is in the other side of the house. Ha'od imach ve'amar efes. Is there anybody else with you? Did you find any other bodies? The answer was no. And then he said to him, Has, kilola haskir b'shem Hashem. You should not mention God's name in the house. Why is it? Because until they get the deceased out, the house is tameh. There's tumah. There is impurity in the house. And you cannot mention God's name in a house where there is impurity. And so the suggestion is then that this is going to... Now we know that burial of bones existed in biblical times. There's evidence of that. But at the same time, it appears that this notion of burning the house had to do with this notion that dead bodies defile. Okay, now, why would you be concerned about that? One, if you intended to come back to the house at some point in the future when you could be restored into the town. You're an Israelite, right? You're an Israelite. This was the place where your family lived for a long time. The enemy has come and conquered it. Okay? And so you hope for the day when perhaps you will gain your freedom and be able to return. And you would like to be able to return to your own home. However, if it's defiled, you can't live in the house that you're coming back to. So you're going to burn it down now in order to clear the area. So when you come back, you could rebuild a house. Something of that kind. The other suggestion was that if this is intended to be for non-Israelites to be resettled by the conquering enemy, there too, there was a kind of a mystical anathema here of a dead body having been in this house. It's a bad sign. And so they want to burn it down. They'll build a new house when the newly resettled people would come in. And there may be, they theorize, this is all theoretical, because it is a very obscure statement, right? But this notion of the contamination of an area by a dead body was not just within the Israelite community. It could have been more, widely spread. So, but it's very, very obscure. And I'm in no position to give you a concrete answer here. And you see what Vered suggested, which are, legitimate possibilities of other meanings of these words, which are strange words. right? Many of these terms are not used a lot in the Bible.
Right?
Yeah, Vered.
The same pasuk that we read could be also another idea, since we are not really, like you mentioned, absolutely sure. And that somebody said, Ve'amar has, be quiet. I add some words. Don't talk much, because everything that happened to us came because we didn't mention the name of God, where it says, Kilo lehaskir b'shem Adonai, like this is a punishment because they didn't mention God's name or God acts or believed in it.
In other words, okay. I see. Yeah. Could be.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Couldn't also be if you really loved your house, or if your house were particularly fine, you wouldn't want the oppressor getting the advantage of your hard work or your association. So one would say, better no one gets it than the bad guys.
Yeah, it could be. We know that that's a very common thing. Right? I mean, I see your hand, Leon, just a second. The best example I can think of is that when Sharon vacated Gaza, moved the Israelis out,
Yep.
the local citizens, instead of saying, wow, look at all these great places the Israelis built, look what we have to use, we can now, use them and, do something good. What did they do to the buildings?
They trashed them.
Yeah.
Destroyed them.
Yes, which is the stupidest thing to do. But that's that notion, I don't want any memory of them here. This doesn't belong here. Get it out. Yeah. Leon.
Well, there is a Septuagint translation that seems to say that this hash of these first three words, at least in some manuscripts, were Venisharu metei mispar. In other words, a small number remained, and that's the way that it is translated by my translation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Interesting. My professor, Robert Gordis, may he rest in peace, one of my Bible teachers at the seminary, had an interesting observation to make. He said, when you're reading a text and it's very complicated, it was called difficilior lectio, that the most difficult and obscure version might indeed be the original one, meaning that if it's old, the meaning of these terms, and they may have had a different meaning back then, So, for example, I was reminded the Septuagint, obviously, which was written around 200 BCE, clearly, and this was written sometime in the 8th century, they may not have understood exactly like we don't what it meant. And so what did they do? Like many modern people do, and basically varied some of the things you read too, right? They make some modifications in it to make it make more sense. And you can't blame them. But it's making more sense to us. It may have been in Amos's time, people knew these terms, right? And they fully understand what he was writing. Remember, there are a lot of words here. We've seen it numerous times where Amos is using words. He's the first person in the whole Bible to use the word. Or he and three other sources. They're very rare words. Yeah? And I mean, the fact that they were, if Amos used it and nobody else did, clearly it wasn't, people didn't buy into that word. and it wasn't used anymore. Right? If you see it used in Amos, but it's used in Jeremiah and Psalms, okay, some other people heard it and used it. So he may have been making up these words or making his own modifications for his day, and they were others in the tradition. Some of these stories and traditions preceded him, and he said, "I don't understand what they're saying." So he may have fixed them. We don't know. And that's one of the problems when you have a book this old, yeah, and passes through so many hands over the course of time. All right, but I would say the general assumption here is, though, that the idea of getting dead bodies out of a house was something, I think we'd all agree with that. That's quite clear. Lohotzi atzamot, atzamim. By the way, it's interesting. Usually it's atzamot. Right, but clearly it's a masculine word, so they were using back then atzamim. Anyway, but the notion of clearing dead bodies is clear, and the fact that God's name should not be mentioned, if indeed that's what that means. So this notion of impurity, of tuma, associated with dead bodies, that makes a lot of sense, because it's an ancient, and that is a sense of displeasure, unease, let's say, that has plagued humans down till today.
When did people stop ripping up their houses when somebody died in it because it was tumah?
I have no idea.
I mean, I guarantee you, when my father died in my house, I didn't rip it apart.
Yeah. No, I don't know. That's a question I cannot answer.
Well, that's why mesarfo is a little bit difficult.
Mesarfo doesn't actually belong here as a verb, more as a noun, like the uncle, the brother of the mother. Like there is in the language of the Karaim, there is this word mesaref as an uncle of the mother, mesaref and mesarefet. But could be that those sentences are missing some words.
Yeah.
And had they been there, maybe the sentence would have been clearer.
Yep, that's very possible too. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so now we have this, so we got a little insight here into what was done when, after the big city, I mean, this is very interesting from one perspective. It's one thing to say that great cities are going to be destroyed. It's another thing to say, and this is what it looks like. You're giving a little flash of what is it like in one of the homes, right? And that's what this is about. The other thing, I see your hand just a second, that the fact that he uses the term biyarketei habayit for the other side of the house. Usually yarketei is yarketei olam or yarketei haaretz, which is great distances. And it strikes me that's a very unusual word to use if you're talking just about a house. However, if you're talking about one of those fortified mansions that Amos has been talking about all the time, and we've seen it over and over again, and this is one of those fortified mansions, then you can understand it's a big house, and they may have to burn down a palace because of this. Okay, Bert.
Actually, the same point you made, but it does strike me in terms of this being very human and very specific, that many times history is written in very broad strokes. Yeah. Cities are burned and nations fall, and this gets down to real people and real stories.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. And it's very helpful in a certain respect. You'd like to see more of these things, even though it's confusing. Okay. We're going to look at getting back to the grandiose pictures here of what these, we're going to go back to the big houses as well as the small houses. But now we're going to see this impact of what these enemies are going to do on behalf of God, because ultimately they are the tools of God to punish this corrupt country for all that it has done. So now verse 11, Ki hine Adonai metzaveh, right? Behold, indeed, God is now commanding. Commanding whom?
The enemies of Israel, yeah.
Right. V'hika abayit hagadol resisim, ve'abayit hakatan b'ki'im. And he will smash the big house into resisim, fragments, little tiny pieces, and the little house into biki'im. Becca, we know, right? It's it can be a valley, a gorge of some kind in the surface of the earth, but here it doesn't mean that. It's some kind of a crack, okay? And apparently, what it's talking about is the house has been shattered into the point where the walls fell apart because fine cracks occurred.
I'm looking at the JPS 2023. It says the little house to splinters.
Yes, little house of splinters. Yeah, that's really good. Right. Anyway, this notion of resisim, it's very interesting because here again, okay, it's one of two times that this noun is found in the Bible. 2 times. All right?
Which one?
Resisim. All right, and then one other form in a verbal form, it's found once in the book of Ezekiel regarding the sprinkling drops of olive oil on flour for a mincha sacrifice, for a flour offering to God. Okay, so that's sprinkles. Clearly it's taking something and breaking up into little pieces. That's it. So getting back to the uniqueness of this prophet's vocabulary. It's unbelievable how many of these words we have seen. All right, and it can mean rubble. In other words, it's just the house has become cracked into tiny pieces. So it fits resisim in a certain sense. It's a parallelism of 2 different words. Okay, and again, one of 2 places where this particular form of the root beit kuf ayin is found. Okay, and the other one, interestingly, is in Isaiah chapter 22, where it means cracks in the walls of Jerusalem. Find cracks in the walls of Jerusalem. Okay, so destruction. And that's all at the will of God. And, as we've been learning all along. Okay, now we're going to go back to and here, one gets the sense that this is yet another instance, another visit to the prophet, to wherever he was at the time in Bethel, going back to a theme that we're very familiar with, okay? But the thing that's different here is the second clause here is something we've been familiar with. But the first one is a real mind blower, all right? Listen to this. Hayrutzun basela susim im yacharosh bi bekarim. So, can horses gallop on a rock? And can the rock, be plowed with oxen? right? In other words, you can't do these things. There are certain things that are impossible to do, right? Given and he's again using imagery with which the people are familiar, right? Horses and oxen, animals, common, everybody uses them, everybody understands. And so what he's saying is, these are just absolutely impossible things. I hear your hand, Lynn, let me just connect it, then it will come back. All right? So where is this going? Then, now, again, we've heard this before. Ki hafachtem l'rosh mishpat u'pri tzedakah l'la'ana. Because you have changed justice into rosh, into some kind of poisonous plant, and the fruits of righteousness to wormwood, which is a very bitter tasting and ultimately in large quantities poisonous plant. We've heard that one before. Okay, in other words, it would take a miracle to get the horse to run on a smooth stone, or to get an ox to plow that stone. That would take a miracle. But lo and behold, you have succeeded in making a miracle. You took righteousness and justice and made them into poison. That's a miracle. You guys are really powerful. Sarcastically. Sarcasm. Rhetorical sarcasm. Actually, in a certain sense, it's brilliant. Okay? But we've heard that line before about flipping, justice into something bad and negative. Okay. Who had their hand? Yeah, Leon. Unmute.
Trying to be social isn't worth it sometimes. My translator again breaks things up. He said, "Hayrutzun besela susim im yacharosh bebakar yam."
Oh, you mean making a change?
That's the change. Can you plow the sea, essentially?
Right, but where would he say it?
In line 12.
No. What is lana? What does he do with that?
Can horses race on rocks? Can one plow with an ox in the sea? For you've turned justice into poison and the fruit of righteousness into wormwood. The rest is like you translated.
All right. I was looking the wrong part of the pasuk. Okay. In other words, I see. He put in.
So instead of bekarim,
you divide it into two.
Yeah, he breaks it into two words.
Oh, but bakar yam. I see. Yeah, okay, you might want to say that, but here you got parallelism between susim and bakarim. They're both plural. So that would argue for the maintaining it, not letting it split off. All right, the truth is, I understand because you sort of want to fill in something because the object that is being plowed is not really mentioned in the second half. However, he does this all the time, where he has a verb at the beginning of the verse and then carries it over without mentioning it into the next clause. Right? We've seen that with him. That's it. It's not
and I thought the bakar it's a group word. Susim is also a group word, but bakar is also a group word, I think.
Yeah, I understand that. No, but that's not my point. But bakarim, that's the Hebrew of his time.
Oh, you mean that this is specific to that time? Because I haven't heard bekarim very often.
Yeah, you're right. It's the same thing.
Bakar.
Where did you hear Atzamim for bones? It's Atzamot, right?
Atzamot, right.
That's what I'm saying. So the grammar rules were different back then. That's part of the antiquity. It's part of the charm, if you will, of this. It's where you can really see the Hebrew evolving here, where usages that were ancient, passed into disuse, and that's some possibly the thing that's going on here. Yeah, but I'm thinking in terms of the poetry of this, right? It's not unusual, or he likes to rhyme in certain areas. So Hayrutzun Basala Susim, Yimiachorosh Bibakarim.
Yeah, and I like the fact that he's got two sentences that are syntactically identical.
Yes.
Horses race on rock, oxen plowing the sea.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, I grant you. Yeah, but I mean, the notion of carrying over words from the first part is part of his thing too. The only again, Hamotzi mechavero alav haraya.
Yeah.
Difficilio lectio.
Right.
But I love this. I love this notion of the use of these bitter, poisonous plants. Again, he's really talking the language that the people understand. And hapachtem larosh mishpat, right? Uprit na, right? So you got AB structure there. Okay, and in the sense, the same thing in the first one, right? And if you just carry the cella over to the second one, it holds. All right, whatever. Okay, but we all get the point, right?
Yeah.
You guys, you have really, you're terrific. You make miracles. You destroy those things that are sacred. Well, that's not a good. Why didn't they say that? Oh well. Anyway, all right. But the point is that the next. So look at this next line. Hasmechim lalo davar, haomrim halo bechazkenu lakachnu lanu karnayim. In the translate, this is we. What he's saying here is, you are smechim lalo davar. Lo davar doesn't mean, well, he may have chosen this, that it happens to be. There was a town in the northern part of the country called Lo Davar.
Yes.
Okay, and that was an area that they conquered. Okay, they're excited about that. They were so happy that they conquered Lo Davar. And Ha'omrim, halo, with our strength, that's the whole point. Transpose that also to the first part. With our strength, we're happy. Look what we did. We conquered Lo Davar. And we also conquered Karnayim. Wow, aren't we great?
Yeah.
Okay. And the whole point, you guys are stupid. Do you really, big whoopee, you're making a big deal out of nothing, right? If you said we conquered Hamat, and they did conquer Damascus, really strange why that's not mentioned. I mean, the northern kingdom for a while had some control over Damascus. And same thing with Hatzor. I mean, these were areas that they could have, to some degree. Now, they never took Hamat, by the way. I don't know why. Some scholars assume they did. We're going to find out exactly right now what they did take. But anyhow, he says, this is all craziness, this excitement of these towns. All right, so now, as I have promised you, hold on. Here we go. Yes. All right, so let me show you. Okay. All right, so you see, excuse me, here, just by reference, here's Megiddo, right? In the northern part of the country. You've heard me mention that many times. So, and this is the Mediterranean. You go inland from there, and that is where you find the great city of Lo Davar. And he may specifically have made mention of this because of what it means. It's no big deal. It's nothing. All right. Then they also conquered Karnayim, All right, and again, this is, see, these are all, both these, here's the Jordan River. The Jordan River is right here. So these are both on the other side of the Jordan. So they needed conquering, right? Because these are lands that came and went. All right, so, but then they also conquered the place called Karnaim, 2 horns. Okay? Just like the ox who slid off, who couldn't plow the stone. I wonder if that was a connection. The point is, these towns where they're saying whoopee-doo. And by the way, up here is Lavo Hamat, this area.
Is what?
See what the way to Hamat. Hamat is a large city up here. Okay? All right. Now, let's now look.
Wait, Rabbi, before you put the map away, whose map is that?
I don't remember.
I mean, it looks a little like Encyclopedia Judaica, the older one. No? That's not one of your places.
No, I mean.
Okay.
Okay.
America.
Berit Hoppenstand.
Yes, Rabbi.
Would you mute, please?
Okay, sure.
Okay. Oh, you're coming back. Don't mute.
I am.
Okay. All right. Anyway, no, I don't remember where I got it. But keep in mind, Lavo Hamat is up here. And here. And the other map, this map, which I showed you last time, it's not as detailed, but let me see. I can find it. Hold on. Give me a moment. Yeah. All right. So you have this map.
Yes. Yeah, we got it.
Okay. So can you pull it out? Can you access this map?
Yes, I can. And I bet Bert can, because he probably posted it on the reporting.
Yeah, it came. It came in a. Yeah, you sent it to you. All right. Anyway, so here is Eretz Israel, that pink area, and Hamat is up here. So you can see it's quite a distance. So Lavo Hamat is sort of halfway in between. It would be Damascus here. It's above Damascus. So Lavo Hamat would be here. That was about the northernmost point of the northern kingdom. And that's why it's now, look at verse 14, which is the conclusion of all of this. And you got to see this as part of this whole structure of this, these verses linked together. Okay? So they are, they're smechim, they're so happy about what this conquering that they did. Okay? But now look at verse 14. Why are you stupid? Because you make big deal of nothing. Ki hineni mekim alechem Beit Yisrael. Neum Adonai Elohei Tzvaot. Goy. I'm going to set upon you. I'm going to raise up for you against you, O a house of Israel, says God. And notice we have a full layout again. Adonai Elohei Tzvaot. Okay? It seems he used that when he's talking about power. He's going to send a goy, a nation. V'lachatzu etchem me'lavo Hamat at Nachal ha'arava. Okay, from the area called Lavo Hamat, the pathway to Hamat, to the area called Nachal Ha'arava. Okay, and where is Nachal Ha'arava? If you will please look at the other map that I sent you as part of this. I sent it to you with these things. All right. No, if you
Rabbi, I don't remember that one. When did
I
you
never got that.
never got it. Okay, maybe I just stuck it on here. I thought I sent it to you. All right, now here. Okay. This is you see the Dead Sea? Yeah. This is the earthquake zone. Part of the earthquake zone. This is the Dead Sea. Okay. And the Dead Sea, the end of the Dead Sea is really up here. I put this line too far down. Move this line up to here. From here down to the Gulf. That was is Nahal Arava. It's called that way, Wadi Arava in Arabic. Okay, that's this area. So there, the country went from Lavo Hamat to somewhere in this area. Okay, and that was the southernmost boundary. Now, just to give you, this doesn't have any. Well, you can see here. This is the line. You can barely make it out. The line of the current state of Israel is right there. Generally speaking, the biblical map would put the southernmost part as perhaps somewhere along here, a little bit higher up than here. But this area would be what he's talking about. So that's the southern area, that's the northern area. And that was the extent of the empire. And he says that this nation is going to come at my behest. I'm calling them up, and I'm going to bring them upon you. They are going to cause you great difficulty. They're going to cause you a lot of, what was the term I chose? Just a second. A minute. Yes. They're going to oppress you. They're going to horribly oppress you. And all take over. And that's what happened. Right? But again, does he say the name of the country?
No.
No. He never says Ashur. Okay? He just assumes, he's projecting ahead, saying, this empire up there is expanding. It hasn't come close to us completely, but it has moved in our direction, stopped. But eventually this empire is going to keep coming. And you're all gone. Goodbye. I mean, literally, you will no longer be in this country because they'll be sent away as exile. So that is our geography lesson for the night. And now we have the honor of spending the last 20 minutes looking at chapter 7, because this now begins one of the a completely different perspective in terms of the prophet and what he expresses in his prophecies. We're going to look at a series of 5 visions. Visions. In other words, things that the prophet saw in a vision from God. Up until now, we haven't had visions, right? We've had words. Now we're going to have vision.
Come up here.
Okay? All right. So there are 5 visions. 3 will be in chapter 7, 1 in chapter 8, and 1 in chapter 9. Okay?
Forgetting what the content is, of these visions? Can you define what we're talking about?
We're going to read each one.
No, I don't mean the content. But when he says a vision, it's just.
Oh yeah, they begin. Call.
What does that mean?
Oh, here on the Adonai.
Is he seeing something that's not there? Is he imagining it? Is it?
Yes, these are things that God showed me. There are things that haven't happened yet, but will happen. That's a vision, right? Something, and there are various prophetic visions. I just figured somebody would ask that kind of a question, so I will answer it. Okay, so these visions come in different shapes and forms. All these visions are all, most of them just visual. A couple of them actually bring with them an impact on the prophet. Okay, there are a number of these, or just to read, some of you may even be familiar with them. So you have examples, for example, Jeremiah chapter 1. There are two visions of things that God shows him that represent what God is going to do. Okay? And they're not, you wouldn't necessarily make the associations. Sometimes it's a word in the vision, or one of the things you see. What is that called? It's called this. That means I'm going to do this and that. But they're visions of natural things. They're not real, but they're predictions, signs of what is about to happen. Okay, Bert, you understand that?
I guess, I'm looking back now from the 21st century. But if somebody came today and say, have a vision of whatever,
right,
and we put them in a psychiatric evaluation.
Right. Okay. So,
or a drug rehab unit, Bert.
And don't forget that Bert hasn't had any visions. He's not one of those people.
Thank God.
I'm a mere mortal, not a prophet.
All right. Okay. We're going to get to that, by the way. Says the other. No, he says, I am a prophet. All right. Anyway. Okay. So Moses and Elijah see natural things that are associated with the presence of God. So Moses had a vision of but this was really almost concretized. So you could argue it was a vision plus. But he had this vision of the burning bush, right? The bush was real, but the vision had in it the fire of God, and it spoke to him, and it told him what was going to happen here at this spot on this mountain. Okay, and that was the beginning, of course, of his going out and going to the Egyptians. Okay, and this is a sort of it's on the border between a vision that is simply something that you perceive but is not really there. This is a kind of a beyond that, because the bush was there. Mm-hmm. The fire of God, he didn't see the fire of God coming down. It was there. So it wasn't.
What he saw was what wasn't happening.
Yeah, well, you're right. We don't know exactly what the reality, but the point is he saw that, and there was a message embedded in it. By the way, it's very interesting. There are, on Mount Sinai, in that area of the Sinai Peninsula, there are flowers that blossom with big red flower. They have a plant, plants, bushes that are desert-friendly bushes that can grow in the desert, and they have these big red flowers. And you can imagine that Moses, this is when he's trying to find the little sheep that ran away. So he's up there looking around. and he sees this bush with these big red flowers. But in his mind, his vision, it is God's presence. And then the voice speaks. So that's what I'm saying. It's not identical to here. Closer would be, again, this is a vision that is concretized in natural phenomena. We've talked about this before. So this is a magical bush, of course, because this is part of the visionary aspect on it. What do we know about the fire and the bush? The bush was not, finish the sentence.
Consumed.
Right.
Yeah, that was what he saw. Who knows how long it took him to realize?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
but I mean, the point is, the bush, it was a magical bush. Okay? All right. Elijah, also on Mount Sinai. Does this sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay.
He saw a burning bush?
No, not quite. Okay. Do you remember what happened?
No.
Is this where the chariots were?
What was Elijah the prophet doing on Mount Sinai?
Praying.
Good one.
When?
Moses.
A long time ago.
I wasn't there.
I was just a baby.
Anybody
Wait, wasn't he there to talk to God to get higher and alone so he could talk to God?
That wasn't the real reason.
Fine.
Possible. But what motivated him to go there? Where did he do all his work? He did his work in the northern part of the country, right? He was talking to Achav, right?
He went there escaping Jezebel.
What'd you say?
Elijah went to Mount Sinai to escape Jezebel.
Yes. Remember,
Jezebel.
In the previous chapter, chapter 18 of 1 Kings. So he gathers together 450 prophets of Baal and himself and sets up two mizbachot, two altars, and he has the Philistines, I mean, they're not Philistines, the Baal prophets offer a sacrifice and call down Baal to consume it, as any good God would do. So
but that's in Haifa, that's not in Mount Sinai.
No, this is not. This is up in the yes, of course. No, this is not on Mount Sinai. This is how he gets there. This is the beginning of the story. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, okay.
No, he's in the Carmel area.
Yeah, Carmel.
Right. So
I said Carmel, you didn't listen.
yeah. Anyway, so they do that, and they jump around and dance and this, and they can't get that damn Baal down to eat the animal, to eat the sacrifice. Okay. So Eliyahu takes his animal, slaughters it, puts it on top, and has people bring water. Douse this whole thing with water so nobody can accuse me of having a secret fire here. He doesn't say that, but the whole point is, I want you to make sure that there's no doubt. I'm not doing anything. I'm just asking God, come, and I want to invite you to join us for lunch. Come on down. It's kosher. And a big beam of fire comes down and just eats it up and goes back.
How many stars does Leon get for that?
Huh?
Well, Leon gave you the answer. How many stars does he get for that answer?
Yeah. Good.
And what color are the stars? Maybe they should be red stars this time and not gold ones.
Hold on. Anyway.
Good one.
Then that empowers Elijah to call upon the Israelites to kill all of these pagan prophets.
Really?
And they do.
Wow.
More than that, even. There was a whole massacre, according to this story. All right? So then, word gets back to, to Ahab's wife, to Jezebel, our beloved Jezebel, right? And she sends out an all-points bulletin throughout the country, wanted, dead or alive, Elijah, who calls himself a prophet. All right? Get him. So Elijah runs. So now imagine, he runs from where? The Galilee, all the way down deep into the Sinai Peninsula to Har Sinai. And along the way, he's driven to go there. It's possible, as you said, that he went there, Tybal, to go talk to God, right? Because that was called Har Elohim. Okay? Anyhow, but halfway down or more, he runs out of, energy, blah, blah, blah. He wants to die. An angel comes, feeds him, gives him enough to eat, drink, and he's okay. Go, continue on your way. Okay. So he goes to the mountain, climbs up to a certain point, and he yells to God, and he says, the prophets and I have been going around on your behalf trying to get rid of these pagans. And what do? You let them kill us. Help. Don't just stand by and watch. Okay? And then he goes and hides in a cave. And then suddenly, something is happening. And he calls Elijah out. And he says, Elijah, come to the entrance of the cave. And I shall appear. I shall be there. So he comes to the entrance of the cave. And down comes a wind. It was so powerful that it shattered boulders. Powerful wind. And that goes away. And then it says, God was not in the wind. And then it comes down, and then there's an earthquake. The whole mountain is shaking, as it did when Hashem appeared at the Ten Commandments. Right? The mountain's shaking. But God was not in the earthquake. And then there came Aish. Now, Aish could be either fire or lightning. Okay? But God was not in the fire. That contradicts what Moses saw. Because by Moses, God was in the fire. And then there was this kol dmama daka, which I translate, and I'm very strong in my belief in this. I've done a lot of research on it. It means the sound, the mama daka, the word daka, which means thin, is for a feminine noun. That's an adjective. And kol is not feminine, but dmama is. So that means a thin dmama, a very fine dmama. And the meaning of dmama is silence.
Yeah.
It's kol means a sound or voice of thin silence. That was a sign that God was there, and Eliyahu takes his cloak and covers his face, so he shouldn't see God. Okay? And then after that happens, Eliyahu again yells the same thing that he did before. God's there. He yells it to him. Why are you letting your prophets die? He says, okay, God, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go down to the Arameans, and you're going to go there, and you're going to tell them, their king, to come and make war and get rid of Ahab. You go tell him. That's your job. And that's what he does. And eventually that's what happens. Okay. But the point is, he had these visions of these appearances of God, which were, in a sense, false visions. The point is they were more than visions. I mean, they were actual natural phenomena. It wasn't just something in his head. God provided these phenomena. But these are things that he saw. It ended with words. But these are things that he saw. So this is like another kind of you want to say a visual, right? Okay. So again, coming back here to Amos, and on this point we'll end shortly. Coming back to Amos, these are things that he saw. But you're going to see in these things, even though there's a message with respect to the things that we have been talking about, or that he was talking about, some instances when there's some very strange things that he sees. So we'll get into this, okay? I had prepared a whole justification for my interpretation of the Mama as meaning silence. However, I will save you that. If you want to know some other time, I will tell you about it. Okay, but
Rabbi, in Hebrew, would you give the Hebrew letters to the word you're saying for silence? Is it a dalet or is it a base that you're starting with?
Dalet, mem, he.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Now the word dome, it can mean to. The point is, Hashemesh begivon dom, v'hayareach be'emek ayalon, a poem. Joshua says that to stop the time, to keep the sun up so his army can defeat the enemy. Okay, Book of Joshua. Dom there means to cease. Okay? It's a conclusion. It's not slow down. Sun, stop. Right? It's a boom. Okay? And it has that meaning. Okay? And the same thing here. The silence it's an absolute. That's the word I'm looking for. It's an absolute. Stop. The Mama is an absolute. It's silence. Many have interpreted a murmuring. The Mama is a murmuring. Because it's difficult to conceive of this. A thin silence. How does that go together? But the point is, it does, because what comes out of that is that God does not communicate that, what you want to apply to the creation of God does not apply to God. And so it's a kind of an oxymoron, a delicate silence. Right? I mean, what does that mean? A delicate silence. It's complex. That's the point. That's where God is. God is in the complexity of things that are basically unknowable. Because God is God and we are we. Okay, these other concrete things. And by the way, it happens to be, in a sense, and remember, this is the Book of Kings, which comes from the Deuteronomic school. And you got to keep that in mind. Remember, according to the Book of Deuteronomy, who is not in the tabernacle?
Moses.
No. Who, according to the Book of Deuteronomy, who cannot be found in the tabernacle?
The essence.
What?
The Holy Spirit isn't there.
God is not there. Nothing. What is there?
The Shekhinah, right?
No.
No, the ark.
No. Yeah, the ark is there, but that's all. It's a box.
The tablets are the tablets there?
That's not.
Aaron is there with his sons.
Remember, when learn this. I've said this before to you guys. Learn this. In Exodus, it says, "Build me a holy place, and I will dwell among them." According to the other books of the Bible that speak of God's presence is in the Mishkan/temple. Right? Deuteronomy says, God says, build me, you have a mikdash, my name will be on it. That is God's presence, his name. And that's a mystical meaning. There is power within the name, yeah, but it's different. The divine presence isn't there, it stays up in heaven. Okay, and Deuteronomy generally does not want to associate God with any kind of physicality whatsoever. So you can see that influence in this story, how the story of Elijah, who is, in fact, that the story comes through the Deuteronomic school. It means it was that version of Elijah was written sometime around 600 to 500 BCE. Okay, and the notion of any kind of physicality at all with God can't be. So this is it's really a pushback against Exodus and the manifestation of God at Exodus, because in Exodus the mountain shakes, right? You have a sounding of a shofar, you've got smoke, you've got lightning, you've got thunder. All these things are up there. And God comes down, it says, and God descended on the top of the mountain. That's what it says. And now here he is on the mountain. God's not there in smoke and fire and wind and earthquake, nothing. Because God is God. The small sound was silence, whatever that means. Okay. Now there are one other vision, two other visions. And here the prophets say it's a vision. Isaiah sees a vision of the temple. And it's not clear if this is manifest in the temple in Jerusalem or if Isaiah is taken up to the heavenly temple. But God is there, and the angels are there. Always has the surrounding angels. He doesn't see God, but he sees God's cloak, which hangs down.
No.
That's what he says.
No. No.
Ezekiel, in chapter 1 of Ezekiel, he really has a vision. And this is a kind of a vision that ultimately comes out and motivates and then touches him. It's this vision that ends up where he sees on the throne, on the God's chariot. God is sitting on his chariot, which is run by angels. Okay, and there he sees the form of a human being. It's fuzzy, and the way it expresses itself, the image of it's 3 stages away from absolute reality, but there's this image of a human being. Okay, that's a vision. Okay, and those are real visions. In other words, it's not as if physically, there was a hole in the ground or something. Okay, so these are a variety of different ways in which visions take place. And so now Amos is going to have his own visions, and they're fascinating. Some of them will surprise you, but it's a whole new approach to his prophetic activity that we have not seen. And this runs verses chapter 7, 8, and 9.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.